Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me for this sure-to-be memorable podcast, the sidekick to my hero, the henchman to my villain, the herald to my devourer of pre-packaged food treats, at least, it's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hi, Scott. I'm always here to remind you that you're a punk rocker. Yes, you are.
Oh, you're such a teddy bear. So, tonight, we will not be talking about the Twilight Zone, although I do encourage all listeners to surf along whatever podcast platform you use to consume podcasts and check out all of our Twilight Zone pods. They all tend to be in the hour-long range. And even though it's better if you watch the specific episodes first, you can get away with not watching if you just want to hear me and whichever co-host, like Brian, for example, joins me to break down the on-screen and behind-the-scenes action for every episode of that classic series. But as I'm saying, and just said, this pod will not be about the Twilight Zone finally. Guess what? It's also probably not going to come in around the hour either. We can all pause to sigh wistfully before I re-engage the listeners here. Oh, wait, that's supposed to be inside my head. Anyway, Brian is joining me tonight to attack a rather daring and heroic, nay, we may even say a super heroic agenda, because we are going to be talking about the movie Superman. No, not Superman the movie. We're not doing a CB radio cast in the late 70s. I mean the James Gunn directed film that was released worldwide this July. This sounds like a reasonable agenda there, Brian?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let us get to the meat and potatoes of this podcast, or tofu and sprouts for the vegans out there. So toss the remote controls aside for now, and well, we're going to be here for a while. And now all this little bit of food talk might whet your appetites. So before you settle in,
let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Well, hopefully you now have your incredibly expensive popcorn bucket squeezed squarely and firmly between your thighs, people, because we're going to the movies. And yeah, this ride is not going to be spoiler-free either. So, let's start with the superhero who, really started it all. Well, some 87 years ago at least. And that would be Superman. Oh, by the way, while I'm hoping that little thing I just popped in there is truly considered public domain, there's no rights issues, that's not going to be the case with any music associated with soups. I mean, I can whistle a bit of the classic Superman music here, but I'm not going to. I also had planned, as just mentioning to Brian before we started recording, an really overly long preamble to discuss my own history with Superman fandom, but I just realized, not necessary. Go look up podcast episode 369. It's titled Superman and Me. I did a solo stint. I talk all about my past history with the character of Superman. It was a few years ago. Not that much has changed. But as far as this movie is concerned, suffice to say, we're going to be looking at this film both as, fellow cinephiles and also, to varying extents, as comic book geeks as well. I happen to think, with a movie such as this, that one's level of Superman fandom and knowledge can color your perception of various things about the movie. My assumption is we're going to cover those aspects as we move through the movie. So, my plan is we're going to break down this movie as I run through it, how the story opens, what does the story turn out to be, the characters, the introductions, and everything along the way, the plot mechanics, the details, issues that either one of us or things that we sense or have come to know have been issues with film viewers out there. We're going to discuss pretty much all of those as we go along. Whether it's something that's specific to Superman and his mythos, I will admit, I will confess, I will tell you right now, and you can already tell from the way I'm speaking, I may be a little verbose. Shocker. But guess what? I also may be a tad bit vehement as well. Also shocker. But, would you expect anything less or anything more from me at this point? Okay. So we said that, by the way, right off the bat, unique to this film, when's the last time you saw a movie which is a either be major or minor release from Warner Brothers that doesn't begin with the Warner Brothers symbol? I wonder if people realize like there's never a Warner Brothers thing at the beginning of this movie. It begins right with the DC logo. You know, the animated Superman. You know, what looks like it's from literally like from 1938, and then the what's old again is new again now. The DC Studios logo, which is sharp as heck. But then we get this opening text, you know, like something, the only thing that was missing, it didn't move down the screen like, you know, like the beginning of a Star Wars movie. Um, might be one of the few things I think is worthwhile just to reiterate on the podcast. So I'll give it a shot here. Because I did transcribe it down as I hear my cats running around behind me, but that won't come out on the podcast because I edit out the noises. So begins with 3 centuries ago. The first superpowered beings, known as metahumans, appeared on Earth, ushering in a new era of gods and monsters. By the way, there are some folks out there, one of the friends of the podcast, who had some issues or concerns or confusion with the word metahuman because they thought that only applied to actual humans. And just to be clear, that means humans or creatures that appear in human form, humanoid form. So that means Superman, or if we were talking about Martian Manhunter or anyone like that, they all are considered metahumans. And that has been going on for a long time. It's not a new thing they just came up with here. Back to the opening text. 3 decades ago, an extraterrestrial baby was sent in a spacecraft to Earth and adopted by Kansas farmers. I love that they refer to them as farmers.
Yeah, it's great.
You know, it's not just that Pa Kent was the farmer and, you know, wife, they were farmers. 3 years ago, the baby, now grown, announced himself as Superman, the most powerful metahuman of all. 3 weeks ago, Superman stopped the country of Baravia from invading Jarhanpur, sparking controversy around the world. And there's been some controversy about this storyline in the movie as well. I'll discuss that a little bit later. Once it becomes once we get into the story, because I do want to tackle that head on. Then we get 3 hours ago, a metahuman called the Hammer of Baravia attacked Superman in the city of Metropolis. 3 minutes ago, Superman lost a battle for the first time. And that's where the movie opens when we see something crashing into the Antarctic tundra. It's essentially what we all saw in the trailer. So when we were watching the opening minutes of this movie, they had already kind of leaked this like over a couple months ago, in fact. So let's talk about what we see in the opening. It's kind of what we saw in the trailer already, but now we cannot talk about it since we've seen it in the movie. Well, the first big thing, it's Crypto. Now, as a longtime Superman fan, and I think I have many friends, acquaintances who are Superman. I don't know anyone who's like a genuine Superman fan. And I mean someone who was a fan of Superman before the Zack Snyder films. That's not me knocking the Snyder films. That's not the point of this podcast. I'm just saying if you were a big fan of the character before that, chances are you kind of at least had a soft spot for Crypto. And there's a slight interesting reimagining of Crypto here. And I'm not talking specifically about the fact that the breed that he's been typically depicted as in the comics, which one would say kind of like a white Labrador, if anything. They kind of moved away from that. This is more of a terrier type of, but I don't care about that. That's silly for someone to get hung up on. It's like getting hung up on the character's hair being a slightly different shade or something. But it's the fact that James Gunn, basing it on his own dog, in fact, decided Crypto's going to be a bad dog. He's going to be a misbehaving dog. He's not going to be depicted as he's often been, which is pretty much a dog who's just as smart as Superman and can understand and do everything. I thought it was a very interesting choice. I will say that I enjoyed it because I think in a lot of ways it kind of made sense to me. Just because when you think it's a dog, just the sheer size of a dog's brain and what it should be able to do, it couldn't possibly be on the same level. So having it be a bad dog, and then I love the fact that we kind of find out why this is such a bad dog. We have to wait till the end of the movie, and then it's like, oh, it's all so clear now.
Right. Yeah, Crypto's great, and My wonder was at the beginning of this film, was this going to be like a cameo for this dog? And we get a lot of crypto in this movie, which as we move through, we'll talk about. Probably, I think if you would have pegged most Superman fans that give an over under of the amount of times or the number of minutes crypto would have been in this movie, I would guess almost everyone would have lost betting the under, and we get a lot of crypto. The reimagining of crypto, an early demonstration of crypto's strength, but also crypto's strong will and desire to do what crypto wants to do was a great introduction. And what I thought was really interesting was Superman is in a weakened state, and Crypto is still able to pull him through the snow and basically be the strong one, the rescuer of Superman right off the bat, which tells us a lot of things that Crypto was an important part of this story, but also that Superman can be hurt pretty bad.
Yeah. When they have Crypto jumping up and down on Superman, I mean, they're emphasizing it with the way they use sound effects. And you realize that this is a Kryptonian dog that's also affected by the yellow sun radiation and thus has abilities and powers and strength, whatever. So this isn't just like a regular dog just jumping on him. He's bone crushingly jumping on him. And Superman, as we discover about a minute or two later, when we get the evaluation by the robots, has massive internal injuries and various broken bones and various organs that are kind of in trouble here. So the combination of those two things is why Superman, our introduction to Superman, is him kind of screaming in pain as Krypto is jumping on him, which I guess the folks who like their Superman to be purely godlike and not show weakness have issues with that. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I've seen Superman beaten up any number of times throughout the years in the comics. It's usually some sort of chink in the plot armor where we have to find a way to make Superman weaker, and it's usually it's a red sun situation, or it's magic, or it's just a being that's insanely strong, like a Doomsday or something like that. But and it is also an interesting choice to have this movie start with Superman having just been beaten the crap out of. And even though the text doesn't indicate this is the first time he's lost, but those who might have had an agenda when they came to see this movie or only choose to look at it through, dark colored glasses, so to speak, tend to go on about how this is a weaker version of Superman and he's constantly being beaten, whatever. And as we'll talk about the story, it's like going, well, there's very good and solid explanations for why he is beaten a few times throughout this movie. But there are certainly plenty of other instances where he clearly is the Superman that we all know. As far as what his power level is, I mean, that's changed so much over the years. I used to feel like every 6 months I could pick up a Superman comic and okay, now he can juggle planets. Oh, now they've powered him down. Now he can breathe in outer space. Now he can't breathe in outer space.
Right, right.
That's as after like 87 years, it's been fluid as anything. So let's get back to the story.
Well, I want to add one thing
Sure.
to the beginning that I think is important to note in our discussion, and that is that the beginning text that you read of what's happening and him being defeated at that point, I think gave the story like a non-traditional structure in that we didn't have to have a first act where he gets beaten up, that we build him up to then get beaten up and then make a comeback. Like the comeback is starting the minute the movie begins. And
right. There's a lot of interesting things about the way they structured that, because one would think you might begin that way and then you would and now we're going to flash back, 3 minutes or 3 hours earlier or whatever. It's like, no, they don't need to do that. In fact, we get a little sample when he goes back, like, oh, this must be what happened before. It's pretty much, here we go. And then we see how it happened and why it happened, which then all of a sudden there's a lot of, oh, I see, I get it now. And then even more so when we find out some other revelations, which we'll get to more quickly than people are going to think.
Right. And from there, we jump. And the second point, I made bullet points for the podcast of things I want to mention.
Mhm.
Scott and I are big fans, and I know we were tickled that in anything Alan Tudyk can show up in, right off the bat, he's the voice of one of the robots that when Superman's brought into the Fortress of Solitude, and that was a nice touch, seeing the robots, and establishes again what I think I loved about this movie from the beginning is the visual aesthetic of this movie. A lot of superhero movies and a lot of movies recently have been very dark. And this was very light. And not all, but most of the action took place in daytime. It was brightly lit. The initial thing that happens in the daytime, the Fortress of Solitude is brightly lit. You can see what's happening in there, and just looking around, it's an interesting place. And I think establishing that aesthetic, which it carried throughout the movie, I think was the first of many steps towards a telling you this was going to be a more optimistic version of Superman.
Right. I mean, they kind of tell you that right off the bat, just based on the reinvigorated colors of his actual outfit, which were more of a return to the brighter, lighter blue, almost periwinkle blue, and bright reds, not, almost darkish maroon or things that we've seen in recent years. You know what? Speaking of the uniform, that's actually a really key point, which I should probably talk about now. I had forgotten about that. Because there's been a lot of talk and consternation about the outfit. So I figured and I've never said anything about it, so I'm going to weigh in on it now. Okay. Um, I liked the color scheme. That is, to me, the appropriate and proper color scheme for Superman. It's very similar to, say, the Christopher Reeve color scheme for Superman. It's pretty much similar to what the color scheme has been for the character for the biggest chunk of his history. Obviously, things change. His outfit has changed a number of times, especially in recent years. I've kind of fallen out of reading comics over the last 12, 13 years, so I can't really attest to things that happened post like 2012 or 2011. I think it's around where I stopped, whatever. But now they choose a couple. They made some decisions here. They went with an outfit that wasn't more of a skin tight leotard type outfit, say that like the one that in tights, the way Reeve wore. And they could have went that way, but a lot of movies of this nature have tended to kind of move away from that. They tend to want to either give some more thickness to the outfits, be it leathery or whatever, or they also tend to want to be more form fitting and maybe have a sculpted look to them, as if, even if the actor portraying the character has actually built themselves up, they still will reinforce like the torso area and like with musculature that might not that to over define it for some reason. Like, which is like, say, it's what they did with Henry Cavill, who did get tremendously built up. They didn't need to do that for him, but they did it anyway. By the way, I don't dislike Henry Cavill's outfit at all. I mean, I personally missed the trunks, but I understand why people have issues with the trunks. That was a big issue with this character. I was happy to see the trunks back. I think just it breaks up the color scheme. So it just looks, I think just look visually to the eye, the appeal of the red breaking up the blue just is preferable. The fact that the original idea for the outfit when you go back to 1938 was to look like, the circus strongman kind of look. A lot of those characters, that's where they came up with those outfits. I mean, Robin's outfit was based on acrobats, and from the circus. The circus played a huge part in comic book character outfits, apparently. But it works for this character. I have also heard the stories behind the scenes with this movie when James Gunn was kind of debating whether or not they should do the trunks. And the actor David Corenswet actually had a really interesting take on it. And he thought of it as the outfit should be something that would have both an appeal and also not frighten children, because Superman is such an important symbol of hope and but for children more so than anything else, which they really do hit in this movie in a number of moments. Um, I thought that was such a genuine and pure way of looking at it. And it made me kind of appreciate David Cornsett before I'd even seen the performance. That just hearing that he had said that, I was like going, that is that's the kind of take I can imagine Christopher Reeve having. And yes, I am one of those people who has more than a soft spot for Christopher Reeve and the portrayal. I've watched the documentary Superman that they released recently. I was moved to tears a number of times, and that is the super. I won't refer to him as that's my Superman, but that's the Superman I did grow up with, more so than all the other incarnations, and that is my favorite of all. But the only issue I had with the outfit, I kind of wish it didn't have quite the bulky look that it had. Again, I don't know. It didn't need to be form fitting, but I kind of just wished it was just maybe a little bit less than what it was. Like take it down at like another 20%. I had this weird thought because of how damaged the outfit was getting during the movie that maybe somehow they might work out a way for him to get a new outfit by the end of the movie. Yeah. Because, I remember, speaking of Snyder, I remember when I was watching the Justice League movie, whichever version we're talking about, doesn't matter. I didn't just hate, I despised the way Cyborg was depicted. I thought it was ridiculous. He looked like a walking crumpled piece of tinfoil. I don't know how anyone likes that look. But if I'm not mistaken, at the very end of the movie, they show he's kind of redone himself, and it's like, and just for just a split second or whatever it is, or a minute, whatever, it's like, oh wait, that's the classic, the way Cyborg's supposed to look. If he looked like that through the whole movie, I would have liked it so much more. But
Right.
I thought they were
Right.
going to kind of go do something like that here. I'm not disappointed because it was one of those. Okay, I can get used to this. It's fine. It's not awful. The S looking like the Kingdom Come symbol. It's it's a choice. Is it the choice that I personally would have made? Probably not. But it was a way to distinguish this character and this version from all the others. So it,
I agree, but I think the important thing about the outfit, discussing what you're talking about, is if you want to tie together Superman fandom, this outfit hits the notes for you. It's enough to hit the notes of the classic comic book look of Superman. And I think other than going modern, to sort of tie all the retro elements of Superman together, to somebody who maybe hasn't watched the Superman movies in 20 years, it's not a direct copy, but it's a hell of an homage that when it hits the eye, it doesn't seem that out of place with the people who have both nostalgia and the new generation who are building their mind of what Superman would look like. I think they did a really good job of sort of splitting the difference. So I was pleased with it. I mean, it's not the coolest looking thing, but the one of the biggest pieces of praise I have to give Gunn is sometimes in some of the stuff he does, I was worried his tone might be a little above what Superman's tone is, that sometimes he's a little raunchy or a little cheeky or a little cynical in ways I like. Not in that's not criticism. But to take the suit back there is another thing that sets the tone that we're going backwards to a brighter, optimistic, simpler version of a superhero story that I do think kids can connect to, and people like you and me at various times in the story probably felt, a lot of joy that a lot of superhero movies miss.
right. And that's something which I feel is so ingrained into the character of Superman. And maybe that was a problem that many folks had with the version that we had been seeing for the previous decade or so, is that there didn't seem to be that much joy with the character. Not that I'm not going to say he was morose the whole damn time. That's also an exaggeration as well. But it didn't seem like there was as much of that with that version.
Right.
But back to this movie, because I'm finding myself slipping into that, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to try not to do that. We get to the fortress. By the way, it's an interesting choice because I get doing the the template for the fortress that people seem to keep using is what was designed in the 1978 movie. We've seen it in a number of other places, other film versions, TV show versions. And Smallville did it. I think Lois and Clark did it. Whatever. I'm not Lois and Clark. Superman, Lois, whatever. I kind of like, I love the fact that that just became, the template for it. Even though there's that little part of it that does miss the big giant yellow key in the side of a mountain kind of a thing. There wasn't, it's an interesting choice to not have it be uh, a a purely symmetrical structure, like like almost like a mountain of ice that it was kind of like listening to a side and like almost was like on an angle. And then we see one reason why it's like that. But it was a very that was the one distinguishing thing that so it didn't look like the 1978 version. It looked like, oh, that's different. As why would you do it that way? And then when we see when the robots bring him in so we can get a concentrated blast, a dose of like healing yellow sun radiation. It's like, oh, okay. Because everything is, because it moves underground, it moves around. It's an interesting take, and I really kind of enjoyed it. So we got the robots. You already mentioned Alan Tudyk, and yes, Alan Tudyk is great as number 4, who eventually is named Gary, because when you see the credits, he is referred to as Gary. Um, he is on the list of characters / people who steal scenes in the movie, because we're 5 minutes into the movie, if that, and we've already got crypto stealing scenes, which he's going to be doing later on, and then number 4 / Gary is stealing scenes, just
Yeah.
the beautifully dry wood of the robot. Um, when he's brought into the fortress, once they're carrying him, they play this recording, a visual recording of his parents that accompanied him on this rocket ship to Earth. It's Jor-El and Lara, and if you're in the theater, like, I'm sure it took you maybe 2 seconds to go like, that's Bradley Cooper. And I bet you every other person watching, we were like trying to look like, wait, did they get Lady Gaga too? Because that would be hysterical. And then you realize, no, that's not Lady Gaga. That's not who that is at all. But although that would have been kind of funny if they went that route, but that might have been a bit too cheeky. Um, I like the fact that he's speaking in Kryptonian, that he's not speaking English, and then we're getting the interpretation, translation, I should say, actually. And this is one of the many points where we're given, a healthy before Superman gets his healthy dose of radiation, we get another healthy dose of exposition. They find ways to squeeze exposition in a lot of these early scenes. It's on one hand, it's always kind of obvious to me, but I think it's obvious. But if as long as you find a way to do it that I find entertaining or delightful, I don't mind. Having Alan Tudyk do it, as we just said, how much we enjoy him, just whatever. I love them doing it that way. It's like, okay, that's different. But now we're at the Jor-El thing. So, okay, this is going to be one of those major bones of discontent for some audience members who saw this film. So let's talk about that, because and the actual revelations that we get later on in the film, where we find out that there was more to that recording and how that's handled. Um, Brian, would you like to give your take on it first, and then I'll go after? Because once I get started, you know what might happen. So I want
Yeah,
to
I'll
get you in there first.
I'll do my take, and then I'll clear the ring and give you the microphone, and you can go to town. For me, it really wasn't a problem at all, because I believe that part of Superman's story in this movie is, when you have the power, it's what do you do with it? And even if you're told you're dangerous, or if you're told don't start wars, or if you're told, don't, why are you protecting a squirrel, or why are you protecting a little girl instead of, smashing robots, or That the idea of this movie was no matter what his parents wanted, no matter what anyone else wants, he was raised by two very decent people, and that raising and his strength and kindness are what basically is the story of Superman. And in a way, it's almost another battle that he wins, in that where he came from didn't determine who he was. And as this movie plays out, there are other very obvious, allusions to where you come from shouldn't be determinative of your value or whether you're assessed as good or evil. It's how you act. So I thought that this was a nod to the theme throughout the movie. I did not have a problem with it at all. And I think if you just looked rationally at what would happen most of the time when an all-powerful being comes to a place where everyone else is weaker than them, it usually wouldn't turn out like Superman. So I think the logical consistency of it, the way it fit into the theme of the movie, I had no problem with it whatsoever.
So the way I looked at it from a number of different angles. In terms of the actual story being told here, the film, that kind of goes along with what you were just saying. For the story they're telling, what the theme of this movie is, in many ways, what the point of this movie is, and which is really brought home in the conversation between Pa Kent and Clark later on in the movie. It's what makes you who you are. It's your choices that make you who you are. It's not necessarily it's not where you came from. That doesn't determine the person that you are. You make that. It's between something being predetermined and having the choice. And that's incredibly important just for humanity in general. Just like we always have the ability to change things. We always have the ability to make choices. There are always going to be consequences to them, but positive or negative, we're the ones who forward it. It's not something that's been predetermined. It's not something that was written in a book of 1,000 years ago, and we have to follow that. It's not it's not Nostradamus, and it's not parents who really didn't have anything to do with a child beyond the first couple years of its life. So the story that's told here, it works just fine. Beyond that, I will confess, and I was just talking about this the other day, so I don't mind reiterating it. Um, I personally have never been the biggest fan of Jor-El and Lara, the different versions of yours. Generally speaking, I've usually been somewhat ambivalent about Jor-El. Sometimes I found them kind of blah or boring. Whatever. They have rejiggered the story a few times here and there as far as what happened on Krypton. Back in the mid 80s when there was a huge revamping of DC Comics as a whole after what people remember as, Crisis on Infinite Earths. And one of the major things that came out of that was the rather iconic writer slash artist himself, John Byrne, took over Superman, and they really just pretty much reinvented the character. So a lot of things that had come before were changed. Like before that, for example, Pa Kent has always been dead. Now the Kents were alive and things like that. But another major change that John Byrne did, again, we're talking 40 plus years ago, is kind of almost building off of the way we even saw Krypton depicted, even say in the 78 movie, for example. The fact that imagining of Krypton had this cold, desolate, icy planet, which was kind of reflective of what the people were supposed to be. Byrne kind of takes that and runs with it. He does make them a bit more, they're not warm and cuddly. They're almost more like Krypton almost becomes more like Vulcan, only with an attitude, so to speak. And their attitude as far as sending, their boy to Krypton, to Earth and so on, is kind of sort of in sync with what they do here. I don't, there's not talk of harems and spreading a seed and whatever. That's a little, that might be a step too far, I suppose. But they weren't the benevolent souls that had been depicted before. So when people say, "Oh, it's been done before," then someone says, "Oh, but that doesn't count because it was an Elseworld story. It was an alternate." It's like, no, that kind of got baked in. Again, Superman, prop as much as any character, because of the extent of and length of his history, things have changed in canon. Things get retconned and things get changed all the time. So. Now, some folks might have an issue because they think this is such an important part of Superman. It's an important part of his history. And that's what they're kind of making. I feel that's what they're making clear here is like, but that's just his history. It doesn't make him who he is. I never liked the idea that Superman had to suffer from the my two dads situation. It's like, well, which is the dad that he's listening to? Is it the dad who brought him up from all the way up until at least till he went to college or Metropolis or whatever version we're talking about? Or the one who was only with him for his first couple of years of his life? Again, depending just how young the baby was when he was sent off. Sometimes it seemed like a newborn, practically a newborn. Sometimes it seemed like it might be a year old. I don't know if I've ever gotten clarity on just how old he's. I always get the feeling he's always supposed to be a few months old when he's first sent out, whatever, or several months old, I should say. Um, but then they would come up with this idea like, oh, but Jor-El is going to talk to him, like say in the movies, like through a hologram in the Fortress of Solitude or this. It's like, okay, so now he's talking to both dads, and is he supposed to listen to one or the other? And they've kind of played with that like on Smallville, there was like a difference. I mean, Jor-El turned out to not be such a great character on Smallville, and he really ended up leaning more on his Earthbound parents. I think that's kind of what they do here, but they just take it to a much bigger extreme. But I don't have any problem with this whatsoever. The fact that we all also, on top of everything, the fact that we know there's going to be a Supergirl movie next year, and I already know the story of that. It will, let's just say, we'll deal with how she's still reacting in the trauma of being, a survivor of Krypton. Makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, it might play on this a little bit. Maybe not specifically Jor-El and Lara, but just Kryptonians in general. So that might also be building on top of this. So at the end of the day, I think I had no issue with it. I do love some theories out there. Um, I love the theory that that's actually not Jor-El and Lara. It's actually Zod, which is like, I was like, okay, that doesn't really, there's a lot of reasons that doesn't make any sense, but I love you for saying it.
Right.
And of course, a lot of people theories were this was not even true, that Lex had forged or faked the rest of it or whatever. Um, the fact that James Gunn himself has come out a number of times and said, "Sorry guys, that's not the case. That's not what they did." Um, so we can't cling to that, and nor should you. The only issue I had with it at all is the way they work to try to make sure we can't think that. And it just seems like it felt like a note that was given for a script where, like, okay, you know what? We need a source that we can trust. So, Mr. Terrific, have Mr. Terrific say this thing. Is like, but the problem I had was Mr. Terrific hadn't been given enough sufficient information about how they d- um, were able to translate and do all these things that they did. But he's talking like he knows. But the news just came out. And for him to say that, it's like, but you don't, I mean, how did you know? How do you know who worked on this and how they did like that? But it just came out. So that was a little, I felt like, okay, that's a band-aid we're putting here just to make sure no one can say, oh, it's probably a fake thing. But I think maybe you needed to work a little harder to make that, make that logical. It was one of the things I went, that feels a little bullshitty to me, but okay, we'll just move on.
But Scott, you don't know where all his orbs are at any given time.
All right, so back to the film. And as we're moving forward, we're getting introduced to all the players and all the threats here. And that's where we see there's this woman who's known as the Engineer. Comic book fans who might recall that character. She's originally from the comics, from the Authority to be precise. But on the comics, she's actually a hero, who was the second person to call themselves the Engineer, actually. Anyway, here she's tracking Superman. She discovers the Fortress of Solitude. And that's where we also discover she's working for Lex Luthor. And that's where we know, oh, she's a villain in this DC universe. And then we just find out that Lex has a veritable geek squad of minions with headsets, mostly standing at a bank of monitors. And he's the one guiding this so-called Hammer of Baravia with fighting codes, kind of straight out of like a video game kind of style of playing. And they're throwing kind of facts at us here. And again, the exposition is piling on and it's one of those things as a screenwriter, you kind of go, ugh. Sometimes it gets frustrating when characters say things to each other like, well, they all already know this. They wouldn't have a reason to say this out loud right now. I know they're doing it for the audience, but again, it's so quick. I don't care that much, but that's what I call clunky exposition. So when you have the guys who work there, one of them who is supposed to be Otis, and that's a callback. Not only do they have a character named Otis, which is a callback to the Otis from the Superman movie, and they've used Otis over and over the years, whatever. But if you watch the credits, the character's full name is Otis Berg, which is a joking reference to the Superman movie from '78. I'm like, Otis Berg, Otis Berg.
Right, right.
When I saw that in the credits, I'm like, oh, that is too damn funny. Because plus, if you look at that guy, he doesn't look like an Otis Berg to me.
I like the way that they do that exposition from a fan point of view, because we've had enough of these movies that we know stuff. But if you're taking your kid for the first time, that stuff's all jammed into the first, 20, 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So that a first time, if this is some little kid's first version of Superman, they get the story, and you and I don't have to sit through a first act of it again. So I get if you were making a better, like just technically excellent movie, that writing would be sharper. But I like it because it propels the story forward so quickly that we get so much more of a newer story.
Oh, no. I am not my issue. Okay. Two things. Number one, I don't actually have an issue with it. Number two, I'm not referring to exposition about the history or the mythos of Superman. I'm talking about exposition just necessary for pushing the plot forward in this story.
Right.
Because that right here, we're hearing through the exposition that Luthor has studied Superman for the past few years, and now he's gotten to the point where he can anticipate and counteract any move that Superman makes. His brain is programmed with over 2,500 different possibilities. Whatever. It's like, okay, it's one of those things like we need to know that, so that's why it's delivered.
Right.
The two guys who are doing it wouldn't need to say that to each other.
Right. No. I get that, but I like that you're thrown in the middle of it, and it's almost like a meta commentary on the video game play of today.
Right.
That people sit back and have an avatar fight for them, and he's the player, and he's communicating the moves. I enjoyed it, and this is our first view of Nicholas Hoult, and I want to say, maybe a controversial take. I thought the dude absolutely commanded the screen. When he's on screen, it's hard not to watch him. Everything he's ever been in, I have appreciated and enjoyed. And I had concerns about him being Luthor. I don't know where I rank him in Luthor's. I'm sure you do.
Uh-huh.
But I absolutely, by the end of this scene, I was like, okay, he's good. He's awesome as Luthor. I'm good with it. Like, as you're inventorying your checklist of what you're expecting out of the movie, having some built-in fandom, he passed the test quickly, and I enjoyed him greatly throughout the movie.
Right. I felt I got a better taste of Luthor and where I started to make up my mind about him. shortly after this scene, more when he shows up at the Fortress of Solitude, and because that's where he really starts to speak about his issues and his why he despises Superman, and kind of the monologue he goes into, because no one's talking back to him, so there's a total monologue, whatever. That's what really sold it for me. I thought he was an excellent Luthor. Um, Probably more so than any other Luther that I can recall live action wise, where you could really hate Luther more so than any other version. That's not to say we didn't hate anyway. I mean, Kevin Spacey was a bit hateful in Superman Returns. We kind of forget that it was him, but he was far more hateful than say the Gene Hackman version in in the Superman movie from 1978, which some people just dismiss as just being campy. It's like, well, it was done for humor, but I don't mind that back in 78 they approached Luther that way, because before that, Luther was kind of one dimensional in the comics, and people just knew him as just, he was the mad scientist, or now he's wearing these, now he's wearing purple and green tights, and just, he just wants to kill Superman all the time. And we're seeing a version of him on this. Probably people knew him best as like the Super Friends character. I mean, Hackman kind of did something a little different. And yes, some people probably objected to the campiness of the humor of it. Like, yeah, but he's he's a he's funny, but he's also a psycho. And guess what? That's the first time we ever, to my knowledge, and my Superman knowledge is pretty good. I believe that's the first time we see Luther depicted in a way where, because he's talking about land, and there's something like, while he's not quite a tycoon, it is presenting Luther kind of as a businessman. He's wearing suits and doing that kind of thing. And I think that kind of feeds into the Luther that we ended up getting in the mid 80s when John Byrne took over, where, okay, now Luther's a billionaire and he's a genius, and he's a political beast and all these other things. Um, Live action wise, I definitely think this is probably one of the best Luthers. I mean, it's certainly better than the last one we got. The only other live action Luthers that really stuck with me, as far as being noteworthy, Michael Rosenbaum on Smallville was easily could be the best part of that show on any given season. That would be one. There's a few others that are decent over the years, but not to be obvious. People always, when they have these questions of like Batman and the Joker, and people get into the thing with the Joker, and when people are going, is it Heath Ledger or is it Jack Nicholson? Heath Ledger or Jack Nicholson? And then someone's always going to say, you know what? It's neither of them. It's Mark Hamill in the animated version. That's the definitive Joker. Guess what? The best Luthor to date that I've seen in my entire existence, and I could probably tell you, I've seen probably 30 or 40 Luthors over the years. Clancy Brown's Lex Luthor, yeah, from the animated series, the Superman animated series, and then carried over into the Justice League series. That is far and away the best depiction of Luthor that I've ever seen. And Nicholas Holt's version of Luthor here kind of made me think of, oh, this is like a younger version of that character. And that once I start to look at it that way, I appreciated it that much more. He is living, breathing evil with duplicative motives, and he's doing a thing where he's several steps ahead of people, which we seem literally doing with this whole video game style of programming a fight against Superman, which does seem like something that Luthor would do. um I was a big fan of Holt. It's funny. That's the first person we're talking about as far as appreciating the version of the character is Nicholas Holt as Luthor. We haven't even gotten to it, but we'll get to Superman and Lois and all this,
Absolutely.
certainly. But it's funny because you had mentioned meta, and it's interesting because right now I'm gonna mention that the person in that armor, that Hammer Bravia armor, is revealed to be Ultraman, who seems to be this super powered henchman, along with the engineer for Luthor. So let's get into the Ultraman thing now. Let's just get it out of the way now, because it's another big thing in the movie, and maybe whether it's as controversial or as a point as maybe the Jor-El thing, I don't know. Okay, here's my thing with the Ultraman. if there was any two things, I have a couple of things. Number one, yeah, it was a little weird for the more comic book fans around. I think a lot of us were like, why are you using the name of a character who's like a version of Superman from an alternate Earth, who's got a very distinctive personality? It's kind of like from Earth 3, where it was basically, what if Superman was a villain? That's Ultraman. And he's been a lot of like really great classic stories that feature that character. The fact that they just used that name was kind of odd. But it's like, okay, we'll just, all you're doing is telling me we're never going to get those the crime syndicate is never going to be in this universe since you're already using that name here. I'm okay with that. I don't care that much, whatever. Uh, the problem I had with it, and I like that I'm talking about everything in a negative way, whereas, because I always want to make sure I'm being really even-handed with this film. Once they enter the Fortress of Solitude, you already know what, if you hadn't if you hadn't guessed it already, that right there is like, oh, I get it. It's the DNA. Because that's how we saw the doors open before. That's why they think Superman is coming. It's like, well, how else would those doors open? Well, the guy whose face we can't see must have Kryptonian DNA. Probably, wait, he would have to have Superman's DNA. It's like, and there's been a lot of famous stories, whatever, of Luthor attempting to clone Superman. And for example, and people probably know it from the animated series, um, I think it was in the animated series where the ill-fated attempt that Luthor did to clone Superman is what ends up leading to Bizarro. Did I would I have liked this to have been Bizarro? Oh yes, I really would have loved that. I was if they if when that mask is shredded apart later in the film, if I saw some diamond faceted skin, I would say James Gunn is my favorite human on earth for doing that. He didn't do that. Okay, it's one of the only parts about the film is the reveal isn't as climactic as one would want it to be. We're like, okay, we kind of all knew it was going to be. It's like, we didn't think it was going to be Henry Cavill under that mask or something, or some weird CGI version of Christopher Reeve or some creepy shit like that. So I don't have a problem with it. I just, I found it unfortunate. Like, oh, I noticed the whole movie. I'm watching the whole movie. I'm like, okay, I'm just waiting for this. Like, we all know that's what it's going to be, right? Is there like any doubt? And when we finally get, I was like, I was hoping to be wrong just because I would have loved a curveball. And then it's like, oh, okay. All right. Although at least it explains why he's beating the crap out of him. Because he talks about how when we find out the reveal about him being a clone, but he's also even more enhanced. And he's being programmed to fight him, whatever, in a way where like, well, of course he's going to lose. Yeah. And so that works. That all makes sense. Like I said, it works. I just found it to be a little bit, and I was a little disappointed by that reveal is all.
Well, based on what we see happen later in the movie, I wouldn't be surprised if Bizarro Superman reappears later in the Gunverse.
Yeah, let's go there because I kept thinking when he ends up going into I guess the black hole or that opens up, I did think like, oh, I wonder if if they can come up with some, plotting, plotting craziness that somehow he ends up somewhere and he gets affected. Because we never really hear him speak either, I noticed. I thought it was interesting. It's like, could this eventually lead to him becoming actually Bizarro? Sure. I don't know if he's going to show up with a reverse S on his chest. In fact, the fact that he doesn't have, see, here's a problem because this new Superman, that it doesn't really look like an S, so we're not going to get the reverse S. That bothers me. But whatever, they kind of moved away from the reverse S anyway over time, and the show was like, oh, they're no fun. But if you're going to do crypto, if you're going to have a dog that's wearing a cape the whole damn movie, then you can do Bizarro with a reverse S. The fact that James Gunn himself has said, yeah, Batmite's in this universe, not in this movie, but he said that with Peacemaker. Like, okay, if there's a chance that we may see Batmite at some point in the future, Even if it's just for like a second, like Howard the Duck at the end of that, at one of those Guardians of the Galaxy
Yeah.
movies, then you can give us Bizarro. Okay, so at this point, we've gotten through a lot of movie, a lot of, a lot of exposition, a lot of storytelling. We haven't even gotten the opening credit yet. The opening title hasn't appeared on screen. And at this point, it's funny, right around this point, I was going, wait, are we not gonna get an opening title? This movie, it's Superman. You got it. And then we got it. Like, they didn't go, they didn't try to do like the 78 movie, or even when they redid it and with the Superman Returns. So we didn't have like the several minutes of the credits at the screen. They, it's a, but it is clearly a bit of an homage to it anyway, and certainly at the end credits kind of have that look to it as well. I did appreciate that. So it's like, okay, we can have our cake and eat it too. We're good here. But after we get that title, we get the Daily Planet. So this is, if we're going to be talking about Superman and the mythos, this is important because this is when we're going to meet Clark Kent for the first time, and we meet all the staffers there, like Perry White and Steve Lombard and Cat Grant, Jimmy Olsen, and of course, Lois Lane. So this is the spot I want to talk about the opinions on the Daily Planet staffers, which is eventually obviously going to lead more to the more important ones, which is Olsen and most important of all, Lane, and our opinions on how they handle those characters, how those actors do, and did they do right by Superman? Um, I'll give you one. I'm gonna keep throwing like minor complaints in because I want to counteract my desire to be super positive about everything. Emphasis on the word super. Um, I almost wish. No, not forget almost. I do wish. I wish I could have gotten more with the Daily Planet. I wish I could have gotten more with Clark Kent interacting with the Daily Planet. A little bit more of Perry White, a little bit more of his interactions with Jimmy Olsen, just a little bit more. I don't know. I mean, I get it. The movie was 2 hours and 9 minutes. Take away credits, it's probably more like 2 hours and 2 minutes or something like that. I wouldn't have minded an extra 10, 15 minutes. I want to see the DVD or Blu-ray that hopefully will have all the stuff that was cut out of this movie, because it feels like there's a healthy chunk that was cut out of this movie. I'm wondering if some of it is stuff with the staffers at the Daily Planet. Um, so I will throw it to you at first. If you, I mean, you can tackle this however which way you want, Brian. You mean if you want to go right to the big ones, go ahead. If you want to talk about, if you want to build up to it, however you want to do it, and I will follow your lead on this one.
I enjoyed the Daily Planet scene, and I could have used a sprinkle more of it. Um, the one thing I really kind of wanted to know was like what kind of journalist was Clark Kent? Like what was he good at? What did he struggle with? But I did like the way they set up the newsroom and introduced us to these characters and do talk about the importance of journalism to this to this story. And we see clearly the powerhouse in the newsroom is Lois Lane. She's the ace reporter. It's very clear she's better at the job than Clark. We established that, and I thought the gun twist of Jimmy Olsen somehow has a weird magnetic attraction to all the women. I thought it was funny because they cast the kid against type, the kid from Righteous Gemstones. I forget his name. He has kind of a hard to pronounce name, but I enjoyed it. I liked it. I liked that it set it up. I would have liked to see just a smidge more of the journalism, but I like the characters. But man, did I really like Lois Lane. Rachel Brosnahan, who we're big fans of here on this podcast, playing Lois Lane, I thought was just absolutely fantastic and carries over her journalistic cred to a future scene that we see. That's maybe the centerpiece of the movie in terms of who is Superman and what does the public want from Superman, and that sort of conversations played out in the dialogue between her and Clark. in the apartment. So I thought it was great. I thought Lois Lane, who does do a journalistic job throughout the movie, uh, was fantastic. I would have liked just a little bit more than just them flying in the ship later, uh, but I liked it.
So my feeling on it is this. Um, it's one of those things that maybe one doesn't realize until you take a step back and like, oh, wait, oh, yeah. Because when you don't have that much of the Daily Planet folk, and we do see them again a few more times throughout the movie, but what kind of sticks out is that we didn't get that much Clark Kent. We see Clark Kent at the Daily Planet, and we see Clark Kent without the act, so to speak, at Lois Lane's apartment, pretty much almost directly thereafter. I mean, maybe like at a scene or two later. And except for maybe when he's sitting next to his pa, and he's recovering, so he's not in the outfit, he's pretty much Superman throughout the rest of the movie. He's just super, which is an interesting choice because it's usually not done that way. I mean, I guess we didn't get as much Clark with the last version of Superman, but I don't even want to get into that. 'Cause they said I wouldn't. Um, so I think I would have liked more Clark, which therefore would have involved more folks at the Daily Planet. That said, on the other hand, I wouldn't really expect there to be that much more, say, Perry White. Perry White wouldn't play that much of a part here. Perry White's not J. Jonah Jameson, where there's a reason why J. Jonah Jameson plays a bigger role in like a Spider-Man story, whether it be the comics from way back when or the current movies, is because he is set up as almost more of a conflict of an antagonist, whereas Perry is just one of the people at the Daily Planet who's, yay, Superman, whatever. I love that they had Steve Lombard in there. I got a big kick out of that. I was like, oh, and they bring in one of the actors who used to be on Saturday Night Live. Was his name? I think Bennett. Was it Bill Bennett, Bruce Bennett, whatever his name is? Oh, Jimmy Olsen. That actor's name. It's Skyler. I want to say Gizmondo, something like that. Gizmo. That's not Gizmo. But his name is something like that, or whatever. Great choice to play Jimmy Olsen. I agree. Interesting idea to have Jimmy Olsen kind of be the chick magnet. I didn't have that much of an issue with it because Jimmy Olsen has been presented in a way where he's definitely been. I mean, he's been in different versions. He's been involved with Kara, for Christ's sake, And I'm not just talking about the Supergirl TV show. That there's been more than just that one version. They just took it to a bit of an extreme here, but I don't think they hit it that hard because it was the two women we seen that one moment at the Daily Planet, and then Miss Tessmacher. When whatever issues we might have with her, we'll get to later. Um, Lois. I adore this version of Lois. They got it right. This is, without a doubt, the best Lois since Margot Kidder. I mean, she's right there with her. I love the look. I love the little vest. I love the attitude. I love the humor. I love her snarky attitude towards Clark's writing. And this is before we even get to the interview. There's something that's brought up here before they're at the apartment, which was very interesting. Because we're talking about journalism, we're talking about ethics. In a weird way, it's sort of to it reminds me a little bit of what the story used to be with Spider-Man back in the day with Peter Parker. Because Peter Parker, to make some money, finally would, he'd bring in photos of Spider-Man to J. Jonah, and he eventually gets hired on as a staff photographer. But of course, he can arrange that because he is Spider-Man. So I was like, yeah, of course he can get pictures of himself. But that's okay. It's gray area, but okay. Here, and she brings it up, and it's one of those things. Oh, I never really thought about that. If Clark keeps doing articles where he's, even referencing like talking to or interviewing Superman, it's like, yeah, that's not just a gray area. That's ethically that's problematic because even if it's a white lie, it's still a lie. You're kind of lying. I mean, even if you can't reveal, That's fine. You can tell the story, but you cannot in any way act like you're actually or talking to him or getting information because then that's really risky. And I could see her, there's a look on her face when she's talking. She's not just joking there. She does think it's a problem. And it's not just because eventually someone's going to figure stuff out. I was like, yeah, you're on some shaky ground there, you know?
But it's also him getting a shortcut to the front of the line when he's not as good a journalist as she is.
Right. But I bet he's the fastest damn typist I've ever seen. So,
Exactly.
so we, but since we've got Lois and we've got Clark, we've got that interview scene, which we had also seen in the trailers, whatever, and we see the entire scene play out. Um, I think it's a great scene. It's a great showcase to see what kind of character Lois Lane is really going to be, that she really is, you know, she's a true journalist and she will do the tough questions and she does see things for the way they are. And it shows the difference between these people. She she is more she's been around. So she does see things through, she doesn't see through rose-colored glasses. She can be cynical. She knows the world can be a horrible place. I love when she talks about him and how the way he looks at everyone as if they're beautiful. I don't know if it's that scene or she says it later on, but it's the way he view. There's a there's always been a charming naivete to Superman, and I feel that's been missing in a lot of the things that we've seen over the years. And that's one of the things that James Gunn taps into in this script and with and David Cornswet taps into with this performance. It's like then you're like, that's the closest I've seen to that in the last 25, 30 years is probably the animated version. Because that's the Superman that always wants to believe the best in people. That
Yeah,
he's
I was just gonna say, in what she is hammering out here is perfect for the moment that he's just encountered. Is that he's coming up against real hardship and doing things that are going to have real consequences like he's never experienced, and she's sort of hitting him over the head with that.
right. It's a really good, strong scene. My only regret with that scene is it's the last. I believe it's the last time we see him as Clark in the movie, other than when he's with his dad. But does that count? I guess it counts. I guess he's kind of Clark there too. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Um, but um, but that's also where we get. I think more so than anywhere else in the movie. Up to that point. Um, we see how well cast these two characters are because she nails Lois Lane like I haven't seen before. And there's been very fine actresses who've played the character. Amy Adams is a great actress, but she was never really Lois Lane. Erica Durance does a really nice version of Lois Lane on Smallville. Actually, she does a great version. It's just the limitation of that character is the limitations of the script writing on Smallville. Just like,
Right.
whatever. But this one, I was like, oh, this is the Pulitzer Prize winning, hard nosed, driven character. But that's not all she is. I love that they could have that measured, but you also see not just the very clear chemistry between these characters and these actors, which is that's when you luck into that's good fortune right there because you can cast two people and just the chemistry is just not there. And we've seen that a number of times over the years. In fact, I would say many of the last several versions of Superman and Lois, the levels of chemistry are nowhere near where I think they are here. Let me put it
I
that way.
totally agree. And I think another thing that really establishes this character is that this is one of the worst ass kickings he gets in the entire movie. That when they're going tete a tete about what he's doing, she's asking the questions that he doesn't have easy answers for and nailing him to the wall on them. Not about maybe how she feels, but how perception to the world is. And that's what's important that's what's important for a symbolic figure like Superman.
Right, because she's trying to open his eyes up to what the reality is because he sees things and it's very it's very black and white for him. It's like these people were bad, these people we were going to hurt these people. that shouldn't happen. I should be able to stop this without it being an issue. And he doesn't see all the different permutations. It's funny because it's about choices and consequences, and he doesn't realize the ripple effect of consequences of what he did. And then it goes back when, like later on when his father is telling him what makes you the person you are the choices. Like, well, that's all part of it. And that leads to his speech towards the end of the movie about how he makes mistakes, how he puts one for, it's like, well, that's what we've seen in this movie. We've actually seen examples of that. It's like, in retrospect, what maybe there was a different way to go about what he did that still might have saved those people, but might not have taken on the risk level that it did at the time. It's a really good scene. And it's a good showcase to see these two. And, if we weren't already invested in these two as a couple and how they were going to be for that scene really does it really well. And from that point moving forward. Um, let me throw in a bit more of the plotting here because, we had Luther having his meeting at the Pentagon. He's trying to drum up support for his Planet Watch squad of enforcers. He's trying to, vilify Superman there. I love having Ultraman there just to flip on the lights. He's this mega powerful guy. And he's just a lackey just putting on lights. And then and if you think about the reveal that he turns out to be a clone of Superman, and that's what Luther's using him for, it makes it even funnier that
Oh
that's what
yeah.
he's using it for.
Yeah.
Um, but this event, because of what they insist upon at this table, and you got people like Rick Flag Sr. there, who is already a part of this universe because we've seen the animated version of him in Creature Commandos, except he has a very different hair color, in
Yeah.
live action. I think the actor wasn't willing to go like, you don't want to color it all white like your director, you know. But this leads to the whole breaking into the Fortress of Solitude scene. And we see the engineer rip apart the robots. We get that moment where I think everyone's here when she throws a little blob of her nanobites and whatever onto almost suffocating Crypto. And everyone's like, oh my God, Crypto. And that's the scene where we get the speechifying from Luther about, it's like, he's not a him, he's an it.
Right.
Which is great, which taps into the whole recording. Now, I could question some of the logic here, but I'm okay with it. So I just move on from it because we're gonna get to that later. Then we get the whole sequence with the kaiju. That's gonna be the distraction. I have no Do I wish the creature could have been imagined a different way? Maybe, but I don't care. It's just a big goofy. I love the idea that we see it initially as this little tiny thing, and, and then it becomes this giant.
And it's like SpongeBob 3 hours later, and it's a huge thing attacking the
Yeah.
city.
So I thought that was kind of amusing, but really, this is all about we get the introduction of the quote unquote the Justice Gang,
Right.
which is Hawkgirl, the Guy Gardner version of Green Lantern, and Mr. Terrific, played by, and of course, the actors involved. Obviously, we all know it's Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner. Most of us remember that was Isabel Merced as Hawkgirl because we know her from The Last of Us and some other things. And then you've got Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific. Okay, these three. Well, first of all, it goes without saying, Mr. Terrific steals every goddamn moment he's on screen after this. From the midpoint of the movie on, he's so good. Quite frankly, probably the best action sequence in the entire movie is a Mr. Terrific action sequence. I've heard talk or rumor that they might decide to spin off a series for him. Yes, please. Get, HBO, give me an 8 episode season of Mr. Terrific on HBO Max that might feature maybe, and then you can toss in other, DC characters here and there that are maybe, not A level, but B or C level, whatever. I'm all for that. Uh, the There's probably no character other than maybe the Guy Gardner one who just pulls off the wit and the humor that this character does, and It's much like Alan Tudyk. I notice all the really funny stuff is like a very dry wit. I mean, Mr. Terrific's wit is so damn dry. It's like choking on dust. But everything from the garage door that takes forever to open, and we see
Yeah.
Rachel Brother just looking at him. Like,
But you know what he gives the movie? He is without a doubt, it's not even close. He gives the movie an element of cool.
oh
Like
yeah,
he is just super cool. And I love the attention to detail that like almost everything he has like incorporates a T into it. The design aesthetic of that. Just I mean, I thought he is the highlight of the supporting cast as far as on the superhero side, in the way that Lois, as part of the Superman's team, and on the human side is an MVP, and to put those two together for the scene that you referenced earlier was a great choice. That her and him go to that army camp together later in the movie is a great choice.
right, absolutely. And casting Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner is just there were some folks I know that were kind of like, oh, Nathan Fillion. They were having an issue with his age. Like, what does his age matter? They had an issue because Nathan Fillion, once upon a time, wanted to be the Hal Jordan Green Lantern. I believe he does the animated voice in at least one or two versions, whatever. When I heard that they were casting Nathan Fillion for Guy Gardner, I was like, oh, perfect. Because Nathan Fillion's got such an immensely great sense of humor we've seen over and over the years, whether it be in it doesn't matter if it's a Joss Whedon production or it's some network thing on ABC. Nathan Fillion always rises up to or above the level of whatever he's kind of like he's in that like Bruce Campbell kind of category where
Oh yeah,
whenever you see
yeah.
Nathan Fillion is like oh he can't do wrong, and the fact he was given a part where, okay, you get to play pretty much an asshole the whole time. I was like, oh my God, that's the part an actor dreams of having in one of these kind of films.
Oh, without a doubt.
And those of us who at least know a little bit about Guy Gardner, I know some. I can't speak to more recent years stuff with the character, but I certainly remember the 80s version of Guy Gardner going into the 90s, which they seem to be echoing a lot with this little Justice Gang here. It's very reminiscent of the beginnings of a different version of the Justice League, which had characters like Guy Gardner and, a certain Dark Knight detective and then so on and so forth. And one of the most famous things, which I really hope they can eventually get to, is like, well, probably one of the top 10 moments in DC Comics history, at least of the 80s, was Batman punching out Guy Gardner. Gosh, I hope they can do that here. The infamous one punch, one
Yeah.
punch. So he's a great character for comic relief, but he has his moments. I mean, there's few things that made the audience laugh more in the theater I was in than when we see him later on in the movie when he's taking on all those troops and all the different hands keep spreading up and there's a lot of middle fingers being used.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. The coming out of the ground with the middle finger. I love the casting. I love the Justice Gang bit throughout the movie. I thought it was funny, and he knocks it out of the park. I couldn't be happier with all of this, with one small exception. And you're probably going to say it, and that is Hawk Girl was a little underused and underwhelming.
Mm, My thing with Hawk Girl, well, a couple things. The having her do kind of a squawking cry when she was attacking people, that's not really a Hawk Girl thing. I mean, Hawk Girl might grunt or yell occasionally, but that's not really part of something she does. That's more something they really did for this movie. It's like, well, she's not Black Canary. Why is she doing that? But it didn't bother me that much. Um, Hawk Girl's I mean, depending what version of music, the whole Hawk family, Hawk Man, Hawk Girl, there's been 8 billion versions of them. It's probably the most messy history of any character in DC history, quite frankly. Anyone from Thanagar, if they are from Thanagar or whatever. I don't know if Like this version, I don't know. Are you an alien or not? We didn't find out. We don't know. That's fine. I feel we'll get more about her in another film. I thought we got enough for what they were doing here. Because we're not getting origins of any of these characters, but
Right.
we don't need that. Um, if she doesn't get the moment at the end with the leader of Baravia, I'm probably more disappointed in her character. I thought that moment kind of like, okay, you you just gave a reason why you're in this movie because
Right.
you did something no one else was going to do, and probably none of them would have done. And that works for me because Hawkgirl is more of a warrior than anyone like a Gardner or a Terrific certainly would be. They would not do that. She would. I thought that was an interesting choice. Like, oh, th you waited till maybe her next to last scene to really tell people like this is who Hawkgirl is. This is what she's
Right.
capable of doing.
She'll go beyond that which others will.
And with the Justice Gang, that's also where that's when we end up getting the whole reveal about the true nature of the message that we talked about before. But let's fast forward to something. It's funny. One of the very first images we saw for this movie was that shot of, it looked like, David Cornsman is like pulling on his boots and there's this weird, you know, cosmic energy thing going on outside the window. And we're like, what the hell is that? And then we have this scene in the movie where it's Superman and he comes in and it's him and Lois and that's going on outside. And then you realize whatever that thing is what looks like this cosmic jellyfish or something, whatever. And you realize, oh, it's the Justice Gang is fighting him because then you can see it's Green Lantern, and you see the green blast, and you see with the T spheres and whatever. And I love that it doesn't matter that it's like, oh, they'll handle it, and they make a reference to the fact it's some interdimensional imp. Now, Gunn sadly has kind of said, no, it's not Mixaplick or Batmite, whatever. Well, Batmite wouldn't make any sense, but Mixaplick would have made sense. It's just it's some other interdimensional imp. It's like, all right. And I feel the only reason you say is like because I may want to do Mixaplick at some point. So I don't want you to think that's him. Because then I would be telling you that he's not that big a deal because Superman's not taking care of it. That's why
Right.
I'm saying that is not going to be Mr. Mixaplick. And the fact that he's already said he's already indicated from Peacemaker that no there's a Batmite in this universe, which means there's a Mixaplick in this universe. I don't know if they may never get to it. They may have it show up on a random TV show or something. It's not an actual film, but I love the possibility of it. But the important thing, and it's one of the scenes that really got me. It's the scene between Superman and Lois here, and why he makes the decision to turn himself in. Now that everyone's turned on him, that no one's they've seen the message has been revealed to the world, and they immediately are like, I love that no one questions it. They're all like, okay, I'm gonna throw this can at the back of his head because that'll do, whatever. But the reason he's gonna turn himself in, it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's because of crypto. And we didn't even mention the scene when he goes to Luthor's office and Rex the plays looking for the dog. And it has one of Luthor's funniest moments, when he's talking, with the coffee mug in front of him, like, ugly dog in a stupid cape. I love the comments. Luther makes a comment like that. He makes a comment about his stupid looking outfit. Another point. Luther you must really hate him if he's making fun of their outfits. Um, but he wants because he figures that they have crypto. And even though he's not a good dog, he's kind of a bad dog, but he's alone and he's probably scared.
That was absolutely went right into my heart center. Like that, another little nugget of just pure decency and goodness from this man.
Right. And that works so well because that's Superman. And you couldn't be more human than that and have that be the reason. And, one can mock moments like, him saving the squirrel, like you'd mentioned during all that stuff, whatever. Uh, I, I I thought the squirrel thing was funny. I was like, it's a moment of levity that's okay in that moment. It's not like he's in the middle of fighting, fighting for his life with Ultraman, and then he just stops to save a squirrel, and then he goes back to it, whatever. At least I don't think that's where it is. Isn't that still what or am I wrong? Wait, when does the squirrel thing happen? What the
It's
kai?
I think it's when they're fighting the kaiju.
Is it still what the kaiju?
Yeah.
Because I know
It,
we have to get the dog out of the way.
yeah. But see, I think that, all those are metaphors that everything is less powerful than him and he's here to protect it all.
Right, right, right. Because it's no different than when he saves the woman in the car from
Right.
when the building's about to collapse on her and so on. There's a lot of there's a lot of Superman saving people and saving things,
Mhm.
saving a random child, saving a random woman, here in a car or another. It happens time and time and time again, and we also see people trying to help him as well, like the guy who tries to help him when he gets thrown into like the crater in the middle of Metropolis. And then we see what ends up happening to that guy later. And probably one of the most shocking moments in the entire movie, because eventually Superman does end up in the pocket universe that Luthor has devised. Okay, so the pocket universe, I'm mostly okay with that. I mean, obviously it's a major plot point. It's what propels the rest of the movie, what ends up happening, whatever. Um, and that's where we're introduced to Metamorpho. you know, confession time, Metamorpho is one of my favorite, kind of crazy characters that started out in the mid to late 60s. Artwork that was beautifully drawn by Ramona Fradon once upon a time, whatever. Um, and except for the fact that he's oddly wearing those shorts, he looks, you know, spot on as Metamorpho. And the actor we know is Anthony Cargan. We know him best from Barry, of course, among other things, but Barry's his biggest claim to fame. I think he was also Mr. Zaz on was it Gotham?
Gotham.
Gotham.
Gotham, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was when I was watching Gotham before I bailed out on that show because I decided I hate that show. Um,
It's a good reason.
But oh, I think the only thing with Cargan playing Metamorpho that didn't it worked for me. I don't want to say it didn't work for me, but I think in my mind, and not just because of how it might have been done on animation, because I have seen an animated version of Metamorpho a couple times over the years. He didn't quite have Metamorpho's voice. Because Metamorpho, I always think, hey, Metamorpho should kind of sound like Ben Grimm should sound. And that's going to be something we're going to talk about later, too, because I'm not sure I like the way Ben Grimm sounded either. And I love that actor, but he just didn't really sound like Ben Grimm to me. Um, you know, I don't know. I'm not saying that Metamorpho should have like a Brooklyn accent or something, but there was something I still enjoyed it. I still liked it. I just kept thinking, I feel like his voice should be a bit. He seems Metamorpho almost has his voice is too much of an innocent, if that makes any sense. But I did like that the fact that they brought in Metamorpho because they came up with a unique idea that for the plot armor of having, well, there's no more kryptonite. Like, oh no, we've come up with a way to do synthetic. Like, okay, it's elements, it works, that makes perfect sense. However, it does lead to one of the things that later on, which might have made me cringe just a little bit. It's one of those things I had to decide how much is it going to bother me. It's like maybe two or three things like that. One of them we've already covered. The reason why Metamorpho is doing this is because they've taken his child and they have him right across the way. So there's one of these guards, one of these raptors, or whatever they call themselves. His job is just to hold on to the kid, and I don't know if he's the one who has to feed the kid or change the kid's diapers, or whatever. But he's certainly the one who has to hold the kid, whatever. And obviously, if Metamorpho or Rex Mason, which is the character's name, has fathered a child, and based on what happened to Metamorpho and how his DNA and chemical were so drastically changed, the kid is therefore not going to look or be human. The but the CGI alien like baby kind of took me out of it a little bit, and I don't know a way around that. I don't know, so I had to. So I said, okay, I'll let it go because it's not that big a deal. And I don't know another way you could have done this. I kept thinking, hmm, the only thing I might have done differently just to avoid that, but then it would still be a weird issue when we see towards the end of later on the film when Metamorpho has already left and we see him on the couch and the woman who's sitting next to him, that should be his girlfriend who he had the kid. I don't remember if they ever got married. I know and she's the daughter of Simon Stagg. He's like one of those multi-tech billionaires like Luther, like Maxwell Lord, who's actually shows up in this movie. He's behind the Justice Gang apparently as well. Um I kept thinking, couldn't he have like just taken her and have her actually be a character instead of this, a woman with no lines whatsoever? She's just sitting there because she was kind of an important character in the Metamorpho story, and he can't do anything because something might happen to keeping his girlfriend there. I don't know. Maybe it would have been difficult, whatever, but we might have been able to avoid this. I don't know. I was trying to come up with a way to get around it, and at the end of it, I was like, okay, it'll just be a weird CGI baby thing. And I don't mean to keep saying CGI because I don't want to make it like CGI is like a bad thing to use because you need it for these movies. But it was one of those things that kind of, you know what? 'Cause it kind of made me. It was the only time in the movie where I kind of had a little. Reminds me of all those babies in the beginning of the Flash movie, and you know how people will rip that apart. And
Yeah.
I go, don't give them a reason to knock this movie. That don't give.
I mean it wasn't a highlight, but it gives you a reason for why the character would do this, and you know that he's tied to that prison unless they can get the kid and get out of there. But I thought the best part, the two things about the Pocket Universe prison that I really liked is you see that the scope of what Lex views as not human is pretty damn big. That there are cells upon cells upon cells of people here, which also gives a future plot device that there's this whole roster of people that could break out of there to provide adversaries for future DCs. And the other thing is the scene with the man who helped him in the street when he plays Russian roulette with him, and it ends rather abruptly. Ingeniously, they shoot it from such a distance that it's not graphic, but you know what happens. But I thought another note to the humanity of this is when Lex is threatening the man, he's like, "Don't do it, Superman. We support." That the guy isn't begging for his life, like he's saying, like, "We love you. Don't do this." And I thought that was really touching. And then the reaction that the burden that this man gave his life to protect him. Like I thought that was another great scene.
It's kind of a shocking moment in the movie, and it may be the most shocking moment, perhaps, because um, the movie has. Uh, I don't say it has a hard time. That's not correct at all. The movie tries to keep a very delicate balance with the tone because you know you have, especially when you have James Gunn doing it, because as you mentioned earlier, James Gunn does have his certain tendencies, which most of which I enjoy. Mm, but sometimes can get in the way of things here and there. Sometimes humor can undercut the dramatic weight of a scene. Sometimes that's a good. Sometimes it's a good thing. It's a relief. But every once in a while, I kind of want a moment to breathe. You know, um, for the most part, moments do get to breathe in this film. I felt, and maybe it could give me an extra minute. I didn't need to hear you saying mush, that fast or whatever. Um, but this, I mean, thankfully, yeah, they do make the decision to pull back. So it's not a graphic moment, but I think it's an unexpected moment. I don't think any of us thought when we were watching that film that he was going to actually murder the guy.
No, and there's a dark joke in it that Lex is surprised it happened that fast.
Yes.
But to Lex's character, even making that joke at the expense of the person he just killed makes him that much more monstrous.
Right. I mean, one of the things whether the movie even needed to show what kind of truly venal monster Lex is at that point, but it certainly does, it highlights it that much further. Like, okay, that's the kind of person Luther is, which actually makes the thing that Superman says towards the end of the movie that much more. Uh, Amazing, because this guy literally murdered someone, an innocent person, right in front of you. It certainly has an effect on Metamorpho, who is broken up because he's realizing that he, you know, to some extent, is almost an accessory to what just happened and the horrors of it. Um, so yeah, we end up getting the whole thing where they escape. This is when Mr. Terrific and Lois Lane. There's a I like a lot of it. I mean, I liked it all. I mean, I love the Lois and Mr. Terrific stuff is fantastic. I um, Whether one can blow oneself away from a black hole. I'm not going to get hung up on changing the laws of physics because it's Superman. Because if you do that, then it's like, you know what? If you have a problem with him being able to use his super breath, it's like, and you think that doesn't make sense. Okay, then why don't you explain his ability to fly? Because when you can explain that to me, then we can talk about what his super breath just did. Because guess what? What's the explanation? The gravity being different on the planet? Because it's about the yellow sun, whatever, because remember, it used to be he could leap buildings in a single bound because he can, but then it's like, we're gonna have him fly now. He can, and he's not just flying, and it's not just that he can propel himself, he can float in midair. He can just
Right.
stay there. He can hover. Think about it. Why should he be able to do that? There is no explanation. There's no real good explanation for it. So again, you can't have a problem with that when you like things. It's like, how does he have heat vision? Did we ever get an explanation what's going on behind his retinas and corneas that would actually cause laser beams to come out of his eyes? What is it about the yellow sun that would cause that to be a thing?
Right,
Because he
exactly.
is that what happens when a Kryptonian gives you a dirty look? When you're under a yellow sun, it becomes heat vision. I mean, at least I can understand telescopic vision. Makes perfect sense. Okay, I can see further now. I can see far away. X-ray vision. That's just every dude's fantasy. We know that's why that's in there. That's the only reason it's in there. Heat vision. No, you can't explain it. Um, but this leads to Lois taking him to the Kent farm. By the way, I do at least appreciate later on when Lois does fumble around with trying to use the Mr. Terrific ship, because if not for that little, and it's a moment of levity, thanks, whatever. Because otherwise, I kept thinking, I know he says it's intuitive, but does she pick up how to use that ship a little bit too easily? It's like, let's go with it, It's fine. Who cares? It's intuitive. It's intuitive. That's fine. He can't fix the garage door, but his ship is intuitive. It's fine.
Right.
Um, we get the Kents, and here we have another issue that people had. And I get it. I think some people went to an extreme with the way they described the Kents, because they said now the Kents are like these redneck rubes who are kind of idiots, whatever. It's like, no, that's not how I read. It's like, see, the positive is they finally decided to have the Kents be like they're really like Kansas farmers. Like they actually have accents and everything. Um, of course, one might question why they have such strong accents, and they brought up Clark, and Clark doesn't have an accent, even though he was brought up with them. But you know what? He's Kryptonian, so maybe Kryptonians don't pick up on accents. It's fine. Um, but I found them. There's a little humor there, but I'm okay with that because it made them that much more interesting. I found them charming. Um, but now I'm going to say something personal. Uh, with Pruitt Taylor Vance as Pa Kent. Now, putting aside, I mean, first and foremost, the scene with him talking to Clark after he's kind of recovering from the mostly recovered from the kryptonite radiation, whatever, and that's where we get the really one of the most important things in the movie, where he's telling him that it's about the choices that he made, that he makes. That's what, and how proud he is, and it is one of the almost tear-inducing scenes in the film. I think it kind of, I got to be honest, personal for me, it kind of hit me in an even more oof kind of way. I don't, it's going to sound really ridiculous. Dude looked a lot, the way the actor looks in this scene and how he looks here so much reminded me of the last year or two of my own father. They are very similar looking. The structure of his face, the scraggly beard, whatever. That's the way my father looked when I would go to see him in the hospital and in the home and whatever. And I've known this actor for years. I've never thought he looked. I actually worried that I might end up looking like the guy because of me putting on all this weight and whatever. But this is the first time and when I first saw him, I was like, oh my God, it looks like my father. And it just struck me. And I remember thinking, oh, wish my father could have sat me down and had a conversation like this. But that never happened. But I think it made me get that much more emotional. And, I think every once in a while, we might have something about, whether it be a movie, a TV show, a song, a book, whatever it is, that something taps into something personal and it hits us in a way. Hopefully, usually a positive way. It could be negative too. But here, for me, it was a positive. So I didn't know if I was going to mention it on the podcast. Like, we've been talking for like a million hours already. I'm going to mention it. Um, I mean, Pruitt Taylor Vance, when you get to see him, he's always been a really solid actor. I mean, he's done a lot of bit parts over the years, but he's in every genre possible. When I heard they cast him, I was like, oh, what an interesting choice. I mean, I'm curious to see this. And that scene is what sells it for me. I really thought he was great in that scene.
I love the parents, and I love the conceit that he didn't come from like two beautiful looking people. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they really sing the praises of the common man in this movie. And his parents, like coming from his parents, like you see people, salt of the earth people are what he came from, and that's who he wants to protect. That's who he wants to be the champion of. And we also get the great, I mean, I don't think it's subtle, but when he goes into his room, they've kept it the way he always had it, like, which tells you something. He was their only child and they're super proud of him. And his room is undisturbed. And it's like when he goes home, that's his real fortress of solitude. Like that's all the memories of his past, the real past that made him. And then instead of the message from, on the recorder, he gets the message directly from his father about who he is. And so I love that sort of mirroring of the beginning here to remind him of who he really is, to prepare him for the last bit of this movie. And and I actually read somewhere they actually studied the dialects and accents of Kansas farmers and attempted to make that as accurate as possible. So people that want to run this through the, language comparison of all the parents of all the Ma and Pa Kents, I think Gunn tried to be more accurate to what a Kansas farmer would sound like. And I thought it was really beautiful. And I thought, the mom sort of running the house and, he has to go out with Clark on the porch so he can get his time in with him and tell him this. I thought it was really touching and beautiful. And, and another really great human moment that I appreciated and enjoyed. And I got a little bit in my feels for sort of like the inverse of your situation. And I was sitting there watching the movie with my son and watching a father impart something to their son about what it means to be your own man. And so it made me emotional. And I thought, well done on the actor.
Absolutely. Also want to point out that in that room, when you see when Lois is there and she's looking around, and one of the things she notices is something that references something that I said earlier in the film during that scene when before he goes to turn himself in. We we have the great moment about, about what the real punk rock is, because that's when she's talking about how he sees everything a certain way. That's the scene where she says all that stuff. And he says, well, maybe that's the real punk rock. And she looks at him like, no, that's not what that means at all. But he lists like the bands he was into. And one of them is, this band they made up for the movie, the Mighty Mighty Crowd. Excuse me. They didn't make it up for the movie. It already existed. There's a shirt in the animated Creature Commandos with the Mighty Mighty Crabjoys. Apparently, I get this feeling it's going to be a running gag. We're going to see, I think, in every DC movie from this point on, somewhere there'll be, I think in the trailer we see for Peacemaker, I think there's a billboard that's got the Mighty Mighty Crabjoys. So I think before the end of this year is out, I will probably own a Mighty Mighty Crabjoys t-shirt at some point. But I just wanted to mention, I realized we didn't mention that, and I wanted to because of the ending of the film, which I adore, and I realized I never mentioned the steps that lead up to it. From this point on, he finds out from Mr. He's originally going to go to Johar Pol because now it sounds like, Baravia is going to be on the attack. Oh, that's the other big thing. So a lot of people have tried to make the connection. Oh, by the way, I understand it. I'm not even necessarily saying they're wrong per se, but there seems to be some really obvious parallels between the Baravia and especially Jarhar to what's going on in, say, like the Middle East, but with Israel and Palestine. Some people might have also made it about the Russia-Ukraine thing until you actually see the residents of Jarpur. I was like, this feels it's more Middle Eastern feeling. That's how it's coming on. I can't say that didn't go into thinking at all. I can't say that wasn't part of it. I will say this. Number one, Baravia has been a thing in the comics literally since the first year of Superman's existence. Back in the 1930s, there was a Baravia because Baravia was supposed to be a stand-in for Russia, and the leader of Baravia was supposed to be a Stalin-like character. For whatever reason, they did decide they couldn't do, even though they ended up having, Superman fighting Hitler in Germany, but they decided to come up with a country that wasn't Russia, it was Baravia, even though it was clearly supposed to be Russia. And even here, the way the accents that are used and whatever, well, and they don't sound like they're Israelis. It has a very Eastern European and quite frankly Russian kind of sound or feel to it. So it's almost like they took two different conflicts. Oh, and as far as Giant World, that's also existed in the comics. That goes back to I think 2002, I think. Except in the comics, there's a bit more of a mystical quality to the place because the leader actually was a time traveler from hundreds of years earlier. It's a wormhole you don't want to go down. So trust me. I got the impression that they just took two different concepts and they said, "Hey, you know what? Moravia kind of makes me think of Russia and the Ukraine. Jar Pearl makes me think of, Israel and Palestine. Let's just mash those two together. That way we can't get accused of doing one or the other because it feels like it's kind of like a mashup of them both. Problem is some people just saw that they didn't really get the Russian part. They're like, no, this feels like it's Israel versus Palestine. I don't think they would want to take a chance like that, but it's hard not to read that into it. And it's it didn't bother me at all. I went with someone when I saw the movie for the third time. That was one of the first things they brought up. Like they only had two issues of the movies, and that was one of them. And I said, no, I can't disagree because I see it. I see it. I just don't think that's what they were really going for necessarily. But I don't know. I don't know how to change that. I don't know what you could have done to make that different.
I don't know how you could be more diplomatic about how he handled it, because it's not like the Justice Gang just go in and wipe the floor and take over that country and kill everybody. They're just trying to stop a battle. And
Right.
but one of the things that moved my son, who's not the most geopolitically minded person, was when the little kid had the Superman flag and was like, and wanting somebody to help. And my son thought that was very powerful. Like, another symbol of whoever the oppressed are, that's the side Superman's on.
Right, right. Well, the rest of the movie, we have Superman returning to Metropolis as he's alerted from Mr. Terrific that, because Luthor has decided to open up this rift from his pocket universe, which is basically decimating Metropolis. And for all we know, it can continue to decimate the Earth and maybe rip. It's the old, a rip in the space-time continuum kind of concept, I think, except that, we're literally seeing it rip apart a city, and they're able to, evacuate Metropolis in no time at all, just so we can avoid the worry about, all those buildings have people in. No, they evacuate. They're fine. Shh, they're good. That's a big thing. We can, because every big superhero movie now that we're worried about, the movies of the past where, wow, look at all the wanton destruction which probably is killing thousands upon thousands of people. No. Let's write a thing in so we're able to evacuate the place in no time at all. And it seems like both of the big superhero movies I've watched in the past month feature a major evacuation of a gigantic city that seems to get done in lickety split time. I'm okay with that. There are people who are mocking, like, no, it's fine. It's fine. Well, how else can you do that? I don't, that's fine. I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the fact that the city across the river didn't decide just to evacuate
Right,
at all.
right,
Like,
right,
no, I love that they're just standing there watching. It's like, shouldn't you guys be leaving?
right, right.
Why are you not running? Why are you not running?
Well, I just think it's hilarious that of all the stuff people pick on, it's like, hey man, you're deciding to make good municipal governance like something that's positive. Oh no, don't want that. Don't want that. I mean, if you want to aspire to an optimistic version of something, have a city have good municipal governance, and the city does. And
Yeah.
and again, the way that the city is evacuated and the threat, something I think carries over into Fantastic Four. I think that some of the criticisms of superhero movies lately have been they've been focused on one thing too much and or focused on little things. And both of these movies sort of have, existential planetary threats, which is, the grand scale of comic book storytelling, right? Like the existential planetary extinction, or, if this fabric continues, it's going to rip the whole world apart. So I like that. I like seeing at least out of the gate an interplanetary threat.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that as well. And but before we can get through that, he's got to deal with Ultraman, and the engineer, and we have the battle in the stadium. By the way, Mr. Terrific is taken out really quick. So much for those T-spheres. Um, Initially, we almost kill Superman with all the nanotechnology, kind of almost, suffocating, literally choking through his lungs, and et cetera, whatever. But we eventually get the fight between Superman and Ultraman, where it's revealed that it's his clone, as we mentioned before, and then it's a balls out fight, and we get the brain versus brawn thing, and we get that great moment where, just when Ultraman has been beating the living daylights out of Superman, I think that's the 1A, 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 or A1, whatever the hell it was. I'm like, why are you smiling? And when he realizes that all these little cameras have been following them around. Now, I did wonder if he sees them, why he can't use his heat version on them. But you know what? Then we wouldn't have had the great whistling moment. And Crypto to the rescue. It's all, what is it? It says something about them being toys. Get the toys, which we've already established. They do a great job of establishing things with Crypto, because he went after the T-spheres earlier. We know the whistle will get him because that's how the movie begins. It's so delightful. Crypto again plays a major part. in this, and that's how he eventually is able to, eventually he sends Ultraman into, or his clone into the opening black hole rift thing, whatever, in a bus, no less.
Right.
Uh,
And by also popping his shoulder out of socket.
yeah, which I think there was a collective "Ugh," in the audience.
Oh my God. As someone currently doing therapy for a bad shoulder, it hurt.
Absolutely. Uh, And we eventually get to the confrontation between Superman and Lex. And that's when we get the speechifying from Superman about what really makes him human. Did I think, here's the thing, I went along with it. Even though, as we see peppered throughout the movie, there's something kind of a bit over the top and corny and whatever. And part of me was like, yeah, but you know what? That's kind of what Superman is. He's the one character I have. He's the one character in the DC universe I could see being that way. The only character like that maybe in the Marvel universe might be Captain America, maybe. That's the closest I would get to it. But this is what's been established about Superman throughout this film, and the way he views life, the way he views people, the way he, whatever. And it all comes out here. You know, so it's a little much, but I was like, I was already buying it. I was like, okay, I'm good with this because I know we're going to get a nasty counter, you know, which is what Luther does. And then we have this moment where Crypto shows up and decides to beat the crap out of Lex. Can I ask you something?
Yes.
I didn't, I will confess it didn't occur to me when I watched the movie the first time, but then I saw people saying it and I was like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that. I said, you know what? It's a similar joke. I believe, yeah, they
Hulk and Loki.
Hulk and Loki. It didn't bother me.
No, it didn't bother me at all because Lex had made it was Crypto getting revenge.
Yeah, that's why it works.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he stole the dog. He was gonna have the dog put down after, he had him like, forever chasing, was it squirrels?
Yeah.
Digital squirrels in the little
And you know this. It probably would have worked even better and been less noticeable if they hadn't cut the scene where supposedly Lex punches Crypto. But there was a scene where Lex punches Crypto and test audiences hated it so much they took it out because he was too mean to the dog.
yeah. Well, I wonder how they're gonna do that Supergirl movie next year because well, we'll see if they change that. I'm
Right.
curious because there's a crypto element to that story which some people might have an issue with. Understandably, I would have an issue with it. I wonder if they might try to
Finesse
change
it.
that, finesse it. We'll see. We shall see. So anyway, we now get to the close of the movie. Luther is branded a traitor. He goes away. We get the happyish ending. We get the cute thing, Perry White saying, "How long have they been hooking up?" We get the romantic moment of them floating up and kissing each other, which is just perhaps even more romantic than Upside Down Spider-Man kissing Kirsten Dunst once upon a time, but kind of reminds me of that a little bit. Um, and we get to the end of the movie. And I don't mean and we get the post credit stuff too, which is, oh, by the way, love the post credit stuff. Him sitting with the dog is the awe moment. And then we wait, several more minutes just for the gag with Mr. Like, it's a gag with Mr. Terrific that made me love it. And it's just like, what do you want me to put the whole thing back together brick by brick? I'm like, it just marches off. I can be such a jerk sometimes. It's so
Yeah.
good. But it's the scene in the Fortress of Solitude. And once again, now he's referred to as Gary, he's been fixed, whatever. Um, do you want to see the recording of your parent? And now it's no longer Jarrell and Lara. It's this huge pastiche which surrounds him all around him, and it's basically different home videos and stuff of his childhood and with his parents. And there's lovely moments like where he's even, Pocket is holding him aloft like he's flying. And you realize that's what kids have done for generations. There's always that time when your kids fly, and you realize, you know what? That's probably been done for the last 80 years. It's a Superman thing. I don't know if they were doing that with kids in the 1920s. I don't know if they not like that. I don't know if the kid had his arms out. He certainly didn't have anything tied around his neck to look like a cape, you know? And they use that song that you referenced earlier, which I have played the song so many times over the last several weeks.
Before you saw the movie, I said, "Will you recognize the voice singing the song, or will you have to check it out?" Because I didn't until I got out of the theater, and I immediately had to look it up. Did you know who it was?
I did not know I was not sure that was Iggy Pop. I would love to lie not love to lie. I'd love to say that I did. I was like, I know that voice.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt.
And I was like, I'm running through my head. I kept going, is it an artist from the 80s? Because it has that kind of that 80s kind of sound to it, whatever. And I was going, wait, I was going through like not one hit wonders, but practically like that. I was going, all right, well, it's deeper than Howard Jones, so it's not
Well,
that good. Something more punky. I'd have to be more punky than that. And I couldn't think. And then when I saw, I was like, oh,
exactly. You know who I first thought it was when it was in the low register? I was like, is this a Mark Lanigan song I've never heard? Lanigan's who from the Screaming Trees and Temple of the Dog. And I thought, is this like a weird Mark Lanigan thing he was doing when he was hanging out with Anthony Bourdain and then I was like, no, that's not Lanigan. It doesn't have enough gravel. I checked it out and I was like, oh my God, that's Iggy Pop. Brilliant. I mean, like, I'm a punk rocker. Yes, I am. And it to be Iggy Pop. I mean, just freaking chef's kiss.
It makes so much more sense than for remote. It's like, wait, maybe I remember thinking I was going through every voice in my head, like, wait, how deep is that voice? Because I'm thinking, maybe it's the guy from Crash Test Dummies, which would make a weird kind of sense because they have a song called Superman Song. It's
right.
Like, wait a minute. Can they use that song in this movie? Wait, if they do, does that mean that Solomon Gordon? Then my brain went to a rabbit hole, which made no fucking sense. And so that's kind of the movie. What I said when I saw it was I liked it with reservations when I saw it the first time. I felt I had significant issues with certain things about the movie. There were certain things about the structure I was kind of like iffy on. Then I saw it a second time. When I saw it a second time, I was like, the issues kind of went away. Like the Jor-El thing probably bothered me more the first time I saw it. It didn't bother me at all the same. And as well as the other things that we've mentioned during the course of this podcast. When I saw it the third time, I said, I don't know if I love this movie, but it's damn close to it. I love that they made this movie. I love that this movie exists. I love that we have reinvigorated and redone and created a new Superman moving forward. And also what this movie is all about, helping to create a new DC universe moving forward. I'm excited to see where we can go with this world, with these characters. And tell me you're not wondering about when they eventually do Batman and seeing Batman interact with this Superman, because that's the Superman I can picture interacting with a Batman and having that contrast of personalities and styles. Because I thought David Cornsweet, by the way, obviously star-making role. Obviously, I mean, he's been in other things. I told you I saw him in Pearl, and when I saw him in Pearl, I was like going, "Oh, if they ever do a Superman movie, they should cast this guy. He looks like he's Superman." And then, like a year later, he's Superman. Whatever. I just I feel comfortable at least saying now that I kind of adore this movie now. Like I can hardly wait to own it myself. I want to see the extras. I've watched countless videos on YouTube of people talking about it, positive and negative, because I want to see all points of view on it. You know, I I don't, if I was going to bother giving like a number rating, and I wasn't planning to do that, but no, is it a perfect movie? No, it's not a 10. That's okay. That's okay. But it's really good. And I have no regret that I've seen it. I paid to see this movie 3 times. And one of those times the ticket cost me 33 goddamn dollars. So I paid a lot of money. um, I Now at this point, I am so pleased with it that even all the things that bother me are so minor. I don't care. Do I wish they could have done a different thing with Miss Tessmacher and Jimmy that didn't kind of make me kind of cringe a little bit? Sure, I do. But you know what? I can add up all the little things, and at the end of the day, they all feel like nitpicks for the overall movie that we got. I do believe there are potentially better Superman stories that I could see happening in the future, and I look forward to that. I watch a movie like this and I can imagine, oh, can you imagine if they eventually do something, just something basic, like, that guy named Brainiac, for example, who I'm waiting to see in a movie finally, or something like that. I'm so happy with what they ended up doing. I'm very pleased with it. Reservations aside, oh, I said a number. I would probably give it an 8 if I was doing a number thing, but it's not about that. It's about just doing a really nice job with the odds were stacked against Gunn. You've got a loud contingent of people who, no matter what, are against this movie, against him, who campaigned against this, who have put out all sorts of negative stuff, which is something that most other movies don't have to deal with. But this fan base, this fandom, has that loud little segment that does that, and it still has managed to succeed despite that. I'm very happy about that as well.
I can tell you, I had tears in my eyes, and I recounted a story to you after I'd seen it, that there was a little boy with a Superman toy and a Crypto toy that as soon as the lights came up, he was flying them around, like sitting a couple of rows up and to the left of me. And I thought, like, that kid, like, he just saw his Superman. Like, this will be his Superman. And I believe the lead they cast, David Corenswet, I believe he took up the mantle and did it very, very proud. I thought Gunn told a beautiful, uplifting, happy story that talked about what is a hero, and delivered the goods on it. It had and something I think Gunn is like the Quentin Tarantino of comic book movies. He goes and finds like little used characters that sort of aren't really known to the public, or that have been in disuse, and he pulls them back up and puts them in places of prominence. In the same way Tarantino goes and pulls a Travolta out of obscurity for Pulp Fiction and revitalizes his career, or goes and gets a Robert Forster and brings him into Jackie Brown. Um, you know, Gunn does that with comic book characters. People like, but the general public doesn't know some of these people, aren't familiar with them. And now they're in a place of prominence because of his knowledge and depth of knowledge of the comic book world. So, last word, my son, what we left out, my son said that was freaking awesome. He's like, the hair on my arm stood up a few times, and he said that's probably the best comic book movie I've seen in a long time.
So I got to be honest, Brian. I'm looking at the clock now. I knew we were going to go along with this. I mean, look, with my passion about the character and and DC Comics and Superman in general, I certainly knew it wasn't going to be an hour. Maybe I didn't know it'd be 2 hours. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to wrap it up now. We will be doing another podcast, which will be released probably within 24 hours of this one, which will cover the Fantastic Four film, Fantastic Four First Steps. So I think on that podcast, we will be covering a number of television shows as well. Hopefully it'll work out. So maybe that will also be a podcast in the 2 hour range, but maybe the first half will be about Fantastic Four and the second half will be about TV. Who knows? Maybe we'll spend more time talking about TV than the movie at all. Can you imagine a podcast that's supposed to be about TV in the first place, spending more time on TV? It could happen. It could happen. But what has to happen now is me bringing this to a close. Brian, thank you for your patience. I warned you ahead of time that I was likely to monopolize the conversation. Thank you for proving that didn't necessarily have to be the case. And I think you more than held your own there.
Well, I think it's a testament to how much affection we feel for this movie that we vastly underestimated the amount of things we had to say about it. That we both really appreciated it and wanted to celebrate a lot of different elements of it. So, but I really enjoyed it, and we will be back with part 2 of our marathon superhero movies and television podcast soon.
I know once upon a time we used to do a whole bunch of things to wrap these up, the podcast up, but I don't do that anymore because you know what? If you're listening to us, you know where to find us. If you haven't followed us on Instagram or X Twitter by now, you're probably just not going to do it. I haven't posted a picture on Instagram for a few months, so, I can't really condemn you guys for that. Just, if anything, just keep listening. Maybe encourage other people to listen. And for every person who hates us, maybe you'll find someone who likes us. That's all I can hope for. It's kind of like me when I meet
Fair
people.
enough.
For every person who likes me, there's someone who hates me and vice versa. Anyway, it's been great hanging here talking with Brian, and hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed talking about this film.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.